Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I am here with a Carl, who is a Jonathan Peugeot fan. I'll let you introduce yourself, Carl.
Yeah, okay. My name is Carl, and I've been, we had a talk, what was it, about a year ago now? It's been a long time. Maybe
Yeah,
not
maybe
quite
so.
a year, but it's been a while. But yeah, when you say my background, I'm former military. I was Air Force, but I've also have a lot of interest in philosophical, the whole area of philosophy, and also a bunch of other subjects like economics and things like that. So I have a very broad range of interests, and I'm pretty familiar with your channel. I think you have some very interesting conversations, and I pretty much respect and encourage your efforts to bridge the gap between what some people call the atheist community, if there is such a thing as a community, but the atheist crowd, and the religious the religious community, particularly the Christian religious community, I suppose. I don't think you talk to too many Muslims, for example, and Buddhists.
Yeah,
It's
not.
mostly between, yeah. But that's one of my pet peeves, that people tend to talk about religion as if they automatically meant Christianity, and it doesn't. I mean, religion is a lot broader than that. So we have to keep being careful and be reminded that even though in many of these talks, people assume that when they say the word religion, they mean Christianity. Religion is not confined to Christianity. But anyway, so when you say I'm a fan of Peugeot, yeah, well, I mean, I guess you could put it that way. I'm not really a fan. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, really, and that. So we always go back to that, all right? That's what started this entire thing, this conversation going on and whatnot. Was really Jordan Peterson in the first place. I was a big follower of the Paul van der Klee channel. But I thought that even though I admire everything that he does and all that, and I think he's a very good man, and trying to do very good things, I think lately he's been a little bit of treading water on a lot of things, and I think Peugeot seems to me has more to bring to the conversation right now, at this point anyway of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started shifting my interest to what Jonathan Peugeot had to say. And I was particularly interested in his conversation recently with rationality rules, and then with his conversation with you.
Right. That conversation was a little, I think, discouraging for him. Not as much for me. I was a little discouraged by, there was another woman, I don't remember her name. She has do you know the name of the channel? She did a review of it that I was contemplating watching, because I just felt like they didn't really understand any of my positions. Like, I'm not convinced Peugeot could steel man my position, and you have you seem to understand my position, and everyone on my channel understands my position to the point where they're really just bored of me talking about it because it's so simple. But my project has kind of been to try to bridge the gap. And like you said, I'm a Jordan Peterson fan. I think it would be interesting to get into what the appeal of Jordan Peterson is for you. For me, Jordan Peterson kind of bridged that gap, because there are a lot of people who are atheists but grew up in a religious tradition, and they haven't had a lot of respect for that religious tradition. And Jordan Peterson, bringing in science, bringing in psychology, bringing in evolutionary psychology, really gave them a scientific framework to respect the tradition that they were brought into. Like, a lot of the anti-theist community has said, they've characterized religion as, appealing to a sky daddy. People have these totally selfish motives for being involved in religion, and religion can tell us nothing about the world. These people are hucksters. These people are out to deceive you. They can't be trusted, that kind of thing. So in that environment, people who grew up in a religious tradition and had fond memories of that were kind of identityless. And this is part of the meaning crisis that Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson and even Peugeot are talking about. So it's very simple for me. Jordan Peterson gave those people a framework to respect the tradition that they were brought up into, and perhaps return to that tradition in a sort of community sense without having to believe a lot of the wild claims of religion. So I've been trying to communicate that to people like Paul Vanderklay and Peugeot, and what I'm finding out is that no, they're really not interested in what Jordan Peterson's project was as much as they're interested in how Jordan Peterson has got a lot of attention for Christianity. And they seem to think that the people that are coming back to Christianity are going to be full-blown believers. Well, I got news for them. They're not. They're not going to be believers. So either they're going to gain some respect for the people who are in my position and my followers, or they're not. And when Peugeot and Vanderklay talk about people in my position, they have a word for us. It's materialist. And the way that they throw around the materialist world, it often comes off as like the N word for non-religious people. It's very much a disparaging term, and I don't necessarily understand why they keep using that, because a lot of the people that I interact with really aren't, they're not philosophically inclined. So when you throw out the term materialist, they don't necessarily know what you mean. And I wouldn't even say these people, yes, they have a scientific framework for understanding the world. You get that just from being in public school, but I wouldn't say materialism specifically is arguing that there is only the material. I wouldn't say that every single one of these people would argue that. Like, they might argue that there's the material world that we can study, but there is this other metaphysical world that we can't necessarily study. We can only infer intuitively what it's like. But the Peugeot and Vanderklay seem to be setting up a world that's really at odds with one another, which I don't necessarily like. So I've gone on a while. I'll let you give your feedback on that.
No, I kind of agree with you, although, yeah, you're right. The word materialist, that's why I don't consider myself a materialist, but again, it's a matter of definitions. I understand what you mean. I mean, because some materialists have gone to the extreme of saying that, for example, consciousness, human consciousness is an illusion, so that there's really, that everything is determined by the material world, and that, for example, even Sam Harris will deny the very concept of free will, because it says basically we're a slave to the workings of our material substance, our material substrate. So ultimately, there is no such thing as really free will and all that, although he doesn't deny consciousness. But some people go as far as saying that consciousness is just an artificial, it's an artifact that really has no influence on the world. It's just a complete illusion.
Well, beyond materialism, what is your take on Peterson?
Well, yeah, and that's what I wanted to finish. That's my thought is,
okay,
I don't call myself a materialist. I call myself a naturalist, which to me is different, because to me, I do believe there are things that are natural, like consciousness, but they are not material. Now, they do depend on the material substrate. In other words, if my brain doesn't exist, my consciousness no longer exists either. It's not independent, right? But because I believe in emergence in complex system, emergence of certain properties, of certain phenomenon that are now transcending in a way the purely material world, such as consciousness. That's a natural phenomenon, but it's not a purely material phenomenon, even though it is reliant on the existence of a material substrate. Are you getting my drift on this? Or
I am. I don't think a lot of people focus on this stuff. Like, I don't think people are watching Jordan Peterson videos and thinking about consciousness. And I mean, it seems to be a very small subset of people that you're talking to when you start talking about materialism. And I know specifically why this small subset tends to be Christian, who are looking for evidence of God's existence. So they want to attack materialism as a way of saying God exists. So I in the great understanding of why Peterson has had such wide appeal, I don't understand why Christians are getting hung up on this materialism. I mean, I do understand in the fact that they're desperate for evidence for the existence of God, and this seems to be like a good place to look. But it just doesn't. For me, it doesn't relate to the conversation about Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I quite agree with this take. Now, I'm gonna tell you what my take is on Jordan Peterson. Maybe that will help. To me, what Jordan Peterson brought to the table is he made explicit a lot of the knowledge that heretofore within Christianity has been what I call implicit knowledge. In other words, the traditions, the rules, the laws, if you want, that were expressed within Christianity, the different ways of the guidance, let's say, for interaction between human beings. A lot of times, they were taken as, well, that's just what we do. And it turns out, it's a pretty good way to live. And so by following these rules, somehow we can't really explain it, but it turns out that our lives are better if we do this, as opposed to not following those rules, right? Like,
I agree.
Say love your neighbor, let's say, although I translate that as more like respect your neighbor. I have to be very careful about the word love because it can mean a lot of things to different people. But and so on. You can have, obviously, prohibition against murder or, coveting your neighbor's wife and stuff like that are all good rules. But people were just following them pretty much out of habit, or a tradition and kind of an intuitive understanding. And, we have to be very careful with this intuitive understanding. I know you're really big on that from an evolutionary point of view. It makes sense that we would have evolved some basic intuitions about moral values and ethics and things like that, but they're not universal. That's the problem. I mean, there are such things, to take an extreme case, as psychopaths and sociopaths in society. And those people somehow don't have the same kind of basic intuitions about morals or ethics or, human conduct in general. So we do have to be very careful when we say, well, we can obviously derive moral rules from examining human psychology, because I agree, it gives us a lot of clues as to what is morally right. But I don't think it necessarily gives us all the truth about it. But beyond that, so now, the religion basically has inculcated into people, into certain societies, the Christian society, an implicit knowledge about some of the better ways, maybe not the best, but better ways, improved ways of interacting with each other. And Jordan Peterson, and he's not the only one, but he was, most prominent one recently in the past few years, has started to make some of that implicit knowledge way more explicit. And it turns out that if you look at it, a lot of these implicit rules makes perfect sense from a scientific point of view. This is where I kind of get frustrated with people like Paul van der Klee and many others. He's not the only one, but they tend to equate science with just physics, chemistry, and biology. And no, science is not limited to those subjects. I mean, there is such a thing called, science of game theory. There is evolutionary psychology. There is cybernetics, which is the science of systems controls, so system control theory. And all these things have a lot to say about how humans would best interact with each other. Now, I'll give you an example. Are you familiar with Nassim Taleb's work? And
yeah, I've read all his books.
Yeah, you've read all his books, right? So let's take the latest one, which is Skin in the Game. And no decision should be made without skin in the game is a fundamental rule for human behavior that, of course, Nassim Taleb doesn't explicitly relate it to Christian ethics or natural law, that's my favorite term for it. What Pajot calls the cosmological framework, I call the natural law. Okay, and we can talk about exactly what I mean by that, but there's a long and storied tradition of natural law scholarship, and basically we can now, with these relatively new sciences, these sciences didn't exist. Certainly pre-Darwin, they certainly didn't exist, and then a lot of that stuff like game theory is in the last 50, 60 years. Not much before that. And evolutionary psychology is even more recent than that. It's about 30 years, maybe 40 at the most. And so we're finding out that we can now make explicit, or what John Vervaeke would call, we can put in propositional knowledge things that were previously only known in a more implicit way, in a participatory, the Vervaeke's 4 P's. So there's the other 3 are what participatory and I can't even remember, but anyway, I just put them all under the terminology of implicit knowledge, right? Like, for example, when a child knows how to speak English at 5 years old, but they can't explain to you the rules of English grammar, but they're still able to follow them. That's implicit knowledge, right? They are able to speak the language very well. They might make a mistake occasionally here and there, but they're definitely able to express themselves and understand what others are saying at a young age, but they would be completely unable to explain to you the rules of English grammar. But it's the same thing. To me, Jordan Peterson basically came on the scene and started slowly but surely telling people, well, these implicit things that you didn't have an explicit explanation for, I can actually provide one that makes kind of sense, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can argue whether it does make sense. I mean, some people have argued in yes, no, whatever, but at least it becomes arguable. At least you can present evidence for or against it. You've now brought what heretofore was something that was kind of nebulous. We kind of had this instinct that it was sort of right, but we couldn't explain why, right? So the child is speaking English, but really can't tell you what rules he's following or why it's right. But so in that sense, I agree with Pajot. Christianity brought in a lot of implicit knowledge that turned out to be pretty correct. And then Jordan Peterson came out and said, tell you what, I can go one step further and kind of explain to you explicitly why those rules are correct. Okay. So does that make sense?
I'm in 100% agreement. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
This is
okay. I thought you would be. I mean, I've watched enough of your stuff to know that.
Yeah,
no, right along the line.
This is what's interesting about the Jordan Peterson stuff, because yeah, exactly. But I don't necessarily know that Pajot understands that, or van der Klee understands that.
Well, van der Klee, I don't think understands it. Not well, anyway. Now, Pajot is a different story, and I'm going to go back to what he said at the end of your conversation. He thought he actually specifically and explicitly put Christianity within what he called a wider frame, and he calls it the cosmological framework. You remember that?
Yes.
And you kind of seemed to me you kind of didn't know what to make of that. What is this cosmological framework? I say that's what I call, and what has been traditionally called, the natural law. Mm-hmm. Natural law is very big in Catholic, in the Catholic tradition specifically. It is much less so in the Protestant tradition. But of course, you go back to Augustine or Aquinas, especially, and maybe many other Catholic scholars have made a big deal about the natural law and what it means. And to me, the natural law is, I think, again, Pajot can say no, yes or no, but I think is what he calls the cosmological framework. And I completely agree with that. I think you cannot analyze a religion, whether it's Christianity or anything else, from within its own framework, right? You have to step out and take a broader view of it. And a big clue on this is that not only, if you want to take, let's say, the point of view that, let's say, of arguing, in apologetics, that, let's say, Christianity represents better implicit knowledge about humanity than, let's say, Islam does. Okay, and I'm not making that point here. This just, let's
just
suppose,
an example.
There's just an example that somebody might be arguing with, a Christian scholar arguing with a Muslim scholar about which religion is the best, let's say. Well, what framework are you going to step in to be able to make the comparison? You're going to have a framework that's above both of these traditions to be able to make any comparison. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. You just say, well, that's my opinion, Christianity is better. And the other guy say, well, my opinion is Islam is better. And that's it. There's nothing else to say. We have nothing to talk about. But from a natural law point of view, there is something to talk about, because you can definitely get into, well, if you follow the rules of Islam, let's say, versus the rules of Christianity, which one tends to lead to a better society? Which has the better outcome?
I hate to interrupt, but can you just explain the natural law? That's a Christian term for what we might think of as science.
Well, no, it's not. It is the set of orderly rules that govern the universe. So to me, and again, you have to be careful, because some people use the terms natural law in slightly different ways. But to me, for example, all the laws of physics, the scientific laws of physics or chemistry, they're all part of the natural law.
Okay.
The thing is, when it comes to the human world, when you start talking about entities, humans, and you can even maybe some animals, or but let's just simplify and just talk about humans for now. Now you start introducing the concepts of goals, of goal setting, of intent, intentionality, of agency, all these things that don't exist in the purely material world, right? And I don't know, if you agree with that, but I think, to me, I see it as all these things as emergent properties or emergent phenomenon that emerge from the purely material world. And then, in complexity theory, we know that there is such a thing. And again, there's a lot of debate about this. So, this is something that people keep talking about is emergence a real thing? Is complexity a real thing? Are complex phenomenon different than simple phenomena and things like that? But to me, anyway, when we talk about the human world, then you introduce a higher level of interaction between entities, right? So now you introduce, we're no longer the slaves to our material substrate, our bodies, but we have a mind that can actually think into the future through reason. That's where the level of consciousness that you call rationality or reason introduces yet another level of control in the universe. So and with that level of controls comes a new set of rules. And we've already talked about, an example of a set of rules that we just mentioned was Nassim Taleb's skin in the game. In other words, people should bear the consequences of their decisions, right?
Yes.
It's very important, because when you are able to make decisions and, heads you win and tails you lose, or, heads I win, tails you lose, in other words, I have everything to gain but nothing to lose, which is exactly the condition that a lot of, what Nassim Taleb calls intellectuals yet idiots are in the position of doing, is making a bunch of decisions that will impact society in general. But if they turn out to be wrong, they lose nothing. They don't lose their tenure in their university, or, You know, they can have really bad advice, and they are able to do that without losing anything because there's no consequences to be paid. So one of the key natural law, it's by far not the only one, but one of the key natural law rules, a law, would be no decision without consequences. In other words, if you make a decision, you have to bear the consequences, whether they're good or bad, right? I know we can discuss all kinds of, nuance on this, but in general, that is a rule that needs to be followed. But that's only a rule. They say in a purely material world, that makes no sense, right? I mean, atoms, particles, molecules, they don't care about skin in the game. They do what they do. They are regulated by immutable laws of physics, and we can argue about quantum mechanics and randomness and all that stuff, but that makes no difference. The fact is, there is no intentionality in the purely material world, right? Intentionality, agency, being able to self-reflect on your own actions and take corrective action in the future, or emergent phenomena that emerge from the material world, but once they have emerged, now they take a life of their own, so to speak. And that's what confuses a lot of people, particularly religious people, because they think, well, yeah, so now consciousness emerges, you cannot reduce it to the material world, and so therefore it's independent of the material world. No, that's not true. Just because you cannot reduce it doesn't mean it's independent. To me, obviously, I think I've mentioned that before. If when I die and my brain activity ceases, I don't see how my consciousness could be sustained.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's. But what I mean by non-reducibility in that sense is that even though my consciousness depends on my brain's existence and material substrate, it can't be reduced. My consciousness cannot be reduced to a purely physical description of the state of the atoms and molecules and chemicals in my brain. You can have a perfect description, physical description of my brain, and you will learn nothing about my consciousness.
I did notice during the talk with Peugeot, his fans really seem to have a problem with me talking about the ethical system or me reducing religion down to an ethical system. But that completely fits in with everything that you're talking about. I mean, you're bringing up Nassim Taleb's skin in the game because that's an effective rule to include inside an ethical system. And if you want to start looking at these various systems of behavior in sort of a game theoretical way, which, as you said, is a science, and we want to study morality to figure out how we can cook up the best kind of morality for people, of what is going to be the most effective, bring the most satisfaction to people, make produce the least amount of conflict. We kind of have to understand it from a scientific perspective. But I sometimes feel that we are in the same exact point that we were when Darwin came out with The Origin of Species with morality, because all of a sudden, we're starting to understand the origin of morality from a scientific perspective, and the religious people are acting exactly the same as they did with Darwin. They don't want to come to the conclusion that morality evolved in the same way that we evolved as a species. They want to say that morality came from some higher source, and I think this is it's interesting because the I wish I could remember her name. I think it's like Equality. Do you remember the name of her channel?
Yeah, well, yeah, the channel is Sevilla King is her name.
Yeah, Sevilla King, yeah.
Yeah, and her channel is Equality Existence.
Equality Existence. Okay, so she did a response to that talk, and everything she was saying in there totally mischaracterized my positions. Like, she made it sound like I was some scientist that wanted to dictate the moral system from up high. We're talking about emergent systems. These are all bottom-up systems, okay? Christianity is a bottom-up system. This system evolved over time,
And yes, Jonathan Peugeot is placing God at the top of the hierarchy, but you and I both as well, I'm assuming you're an atheist. Are you an atheist, Carl?
I prefer to call myself an agnostic.
Okay, so
that's just for a reason. It's more for tactical reasons than anything else. I mean, some people would think I'm an atheist.
Right. So
I prefer the term agnostic, but that's just me.
But both
I don't have any objections to the term atheist. I do have an objection, just like you. I have an objection to certain brands of atheism, which are actually more like a religion than anything else. But anyway,
both of us would be skeptical that the emergent system of Christianity came from a God. Can I say that?
Yes, yeah, that would be correct. Okay. There's one thing I wish to say about your conversation. Going back to your conversation with Peugeot and ethics, Christianity. I think his objection, and when I was listening to it, he did agree that Christianity is a system of ethics. What he was saying is that it's not just that; it's a lot more than that.
I agree.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But I think. Okay. So you agree, but I think he didn't get the fact that you were agreeing with that. I think the way I got it anyway, the way I interpreted his reaction was that you were saying to him, you seem to be saying that it was just a system of ethics, and he thought, well, it is that, but it's also a lot more. It's a system. It's a way to bind people together under a more participatory way of living in the world. Right?
That is the whole purpose of ethics. I mean, the whole purpose of an ethical system is to bind people under a cooperative system in a game theoretical way. You have to admit, like we're talking about an emergent ethic, that the ethic that emerges when people are not able to communicate is going to be very different than the ethics that emerge when we can communicate, we can bargain, we can
absolutely.
So it's a much different system. So yes, it is much more. But for me, what interests me is morality. What interests me is ethics. So when I'm going to religion, to religion basically as, if we're going to devise an ethical system, like a government is an ethical system, a corporate culture is an ethical system. It seems, since there is kind of this evolutionary development cycle, and they even do this with products now, if you want to look at nature, since nature has been refining this thing for millions of years, they've probably got something going here that we might want to use. I was reading something recently about how shark skin has evolved this microscopic pattern on it that bacteria can't adhere to. And now they're trying to use that microscopic pattern in medical material because, like, you'd never have to sterilize it. No bacteria can actually adhere to it. So that's an example of looking at nature and saying, this evolved over billions of years. Let's use it to our advantage. So I'm looking at religion in that exact same way and wanting to study it. I realize it seems very offensive to a lot of religious people, but the thing that I wanted you to explain to me, because you seem to really understand what Peugeot is saying, is what is the relevance of all this? Because in a very Vervaeke type of way, relevance, realization 101, I think people come to his material and think, how is this relevant? How can this help me? How can this make my life better? Some people who have that intuition, he even said this in our conversation, it's very difficult to communicate with people who don't have the same intuition as me. Well, one of the beautiful things about language is that it allows us to communicate with people who don't have the same intuition as us. It's very easy to talk to people who have the same intuition. I feel like when I read his comment section or I see his fans interacting with one another, they're very much on the same page, but they're not saying anything that really can bridge that gap between the people in my comment section or you and I who are having this conversation very much in a way that we could potentially study it and learn more and understand more in the future. I don't know if you remember the first Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson podcast was very much over this topic. This topic about,
yes, I do.
Yeah, this topic of truth. Sam Harris is saying, science is the highest truth. And Peterson is very much saying, no, wisdom is the highest truth. And like you are saying here, the scientific truths are below that, nested within. We have this wisdom. We know this pattern of behavior works. We don't necessarily know how, because we haven't had the scientific understanding to see these smaller truths embedded in the larger truth of wisdom. Jordan Peterson comes along and he says, listen, I'm going to tell you what the smaller truths are down in there. And since so many people have conceived those smaller truths as the higher truth, in Sam Harris's worldview, the scientific facts are above the moral facts below. Jordan Peterson is basically saying, no, these larger facts, this wisdom that we have, we don't necessarily understand, and that we should be studying it, which is an interesting thing, and it's something that I want to do. But I have a feeling that the Peugeot fans and Jonathan Peugeot himself is just accessing that wisdom and not really respecting the perspective that Jordan Peterson is coming from, saying, no, we want to understand that wisdom because we want to refine it. We want to make it better. Peugeot does, and I'll give him credit for this, respect the fact that Christianity has the apparatus to change over time. So it is obviously studying that wisdom at some level and refining it. But I think it's only refining it intuitively. And science is such a powerful tool that we could, obviously, we have to have some respect. We don't want to have too much hubris here. We want to throw out the bathwater and not the baby. We want to be careful about that. But as long as we do have that respect and we are careful about it, I don't see how this project can produce anything but goodness. Peugeot is very much, just one more thing, Peugeot is very much afraid, and he's even said this, of some sort of scientist types dictating morality from on high. But as we both agree, there's this emergent factor. I mean, it's emergent from politics, from the capitalist system, the democratic system that we have. In our modern world, I don't see how we have to worry about some powerful force from above, coming up with some scientific morality and dictating it from above. I don't think that's a possibility in the modern world. So I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of stuff you say. I mean, one of the things I said about Jordan Peterson was, of course, that he made some of the previously implicit knowledge more explicit.
Yes.
But the other thing he said that you pointed out just right now is very, very important, at least as important as the first thing that he did, was to say, just because something is not explicit knowledge does not make it non-knowledge. And that's the big mistake that people, Sam Harris, and his ilk are making. Basically, they're rejecting any knowledge outside of propositional knowledge as being actual knowledge. Now, he may have, after interacting with Peterson, I think he's probably moderated that view a little bit, but that's where they're coming from.
A tiny bit he's moderated.
A tiny bit, but not much. You're right. And that's really bad. There's, compared to the knowledge that is incorporated into, let's say, human society, the explicit part is growing as scientific advances in various fields become more and more important. We know more and more, but that doesn't mean we know everything, And so just because something is not explicitly explained by science doesn't make it real, in the first place. And that's, I think, the underestimation of how much of our knowledge is still, even today, after modernity and after scientific advances and all that stuff, a lot of that knowledge is still kind of nebulous and implicit. I think that people like Sam Harris underestimate that a lot. And that's why we have to be careful. And that's why, personally, I'm a more conservative type of person, because I say, you don't just reject stuff just because, it's the old Chesterton's fence, right?
I agree.
You're familiar with it. Yeah, right.
Go ahead and explain it for people.
Yeah, people know, G.K. Chesterton in one of his books. I'm not an expert on G.K. Chesterton, but I kind of like a lot of his writings.
The meme is great. The fence meme.
But yeah, the meme is great. Yeah. So, somebody comes into a meadow or, some place in the forest or whatever, and encounters a fence. And so some people's tendency would be to say, why is there a fence here? There's no need for it. Let's just get rid of it. That it doesn't do anything. And the other type of person, the more conservative type of person, and the more maybe thoughtful kind of person, I would say, well, before we get rid of that fence, tear it apart, maybe we should find out what's there in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
So the Sam Harrises of the world, here's this fence, religion. I don't understand it. Doesn't seem to make sense to me. Let's just get rid of it. Right? And the Jordan Petersons of the world are like, well, wait a second. By rejecting religion just like that, without further explanation, that, well, it's just religion bad, you're probably missing a lot of truth about the world that are maybe very important, right? And so just because we can't explain all that stuff doesn't mean we should automatically reject it out of hand. And I think that's the big difference, and that's why, people like Paul van der Klee, I was initially, I was on board with his project of kind of debunking that view of the world, that religion was automatically bad because it's not scientific, so therefore we should reject everything about it. And, I think the Sam Harrises of the world were missing some important points about how human culture evolves, how people live together, what binds them together. And so I was all on board with that aspect of things. Where I kind of left the train was when you start pushing it too far and say that, well, basically, and that's where Paul van der Klee ended up. I don't think that's one of the differences between Pajot and him. That Paul van der Klee basically ended up saying more and more, well, there's really no difference between science and religion. It's just two different aspects. You can look at it one way or the other, but there's really no difference. I completely disagree with that. Completely disagree. There's huge differences. He's also very against what he calls secularism or secularity. And I'm very much pro-secularism and pro-secularity, even though I'm not anti-religion, just like you. I'm not an anti-theist, to use your terminology. But secularity is not the rejection of God. Secularity is just a philosophy of letting people believe in the gods that they want, right? And not imposing from the top one model for everybody. That's what secularity is about. It's not saying that there is no God, or first of all, secularity, that is an issue associated with government, So more than anything else, it's something that came out of modernity. And again, that's why I very much disagree with Paul van der Klee's opposition to modernity and supposed promotion. He's kind of ambiguous on that, but what he calls post-modernity. And you can argue about, if you look at post-modernity as an era, I can be on board with that. If you look at post-modernity as a philosophy, I'm completely opposed to it. It's one of the greatest evils. Postmodern philosophy is one of the greatest evils that has ever
I agree.
Befell. It's just, there are plenty of people talking about that. So I'm not going to, just listen to James Lindsay and, all these guys and, all the stuff that's been written about this, anyway, the project of modernity and a secular society are essential for peaceful coexistence. There's no arguing it. To me, that as soon as you've left that train, you're no longer on my side. Trying to say that secularity is what's causing the meaning crisis today, I completely disagree with that. That has nothing to do.
I totally disagree too.
Well, I can say this now, just like anything else. If you push it too far, yeah, you can get in trouble. So I agree that, if somebody interprets secularity as saying that we should eradicate religion entirely, then no, that's to me, that's a bad interpretation. That's not what it is. Secularity is about tolerance of people's religion, but it does mean that you don't want to impose a religion on everybody.
So I have a couple more questions. I have about 20 more minutes, and I'll read super chats at the end. Alex Karras sent me a super chat, so thanks for that. So talking about Paul, and I mean, I've had this conversation with him privately. It's so funny that he is such a huge Peterson fan, because I really feel his project now is at odds with Peterson, because Peterson.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Peterson very much has a materialist framework for non-believers to respect religion, which is powerful. People do not want to hate religion, especially if it's a religion that they grew up in. Like, so many anti-theists fall into this trap of hating their own parents. So what Peterson has done, and this is perfect in the self-help section of the bookstore, is giving them a framework to understand the people in their lives that they may disagree with on religion. It's the same exact project of Jonathan Haidt, but Peterson makes it more interesting, I think, because he relates it directly to the religious stories and whatnot in a way that Haidt doesn't do. So I think that's a powerful thing. But then Paul, and I watch his videos not regularly, but occasionally if the topic interests me, and he's always attacking materialism, which is attacking the framework that Peterson is working within. So it's very frustrating to me that he does that. And I don't want to throw shade at Paul. Maybe I am unintentionally here. I don't know if it's that I understand that the original theist and the original atheist theist debate is over materialism. I realize that that's a thing, but this is really a debate between atheists and Christian apologists. And Paul doesn't openly call himself a Christian apologist, and I would never call Peterson a Christian apologist. When Rationality Rules does it, it's a huge category error. So I'll let you respond, and then I have one more. Yeah. I'll let you respond, and then I have one more question about Jonathan Peugeot and the relevance of his system. So,
no, basically, I agree with what you said. There is a problem with and that's why I kind of started steering away from the Paul van der Kley stuff, because one of the things that's been happening with this channel, except for the occasional conversation, I obviously watched his recent conversation with Peugeot and things like that, but basically it was becoming stale to me, because he was kind of repeating the same thing and not reaching any real conclusions on anything, and the fact that he's now, again, I don't know if we talked about this before we went on the air here, but I'm careful with the term materialist, and I prefer the term naturalistic to me, as opposed to material. Because materialist sounds to me, and again, it's a matter of definition. So I'm not against you using the term, in the way you're using it. I just think there's a little bit of a danger, because again, when we talk about phenomena in the world, to me there are things that are as non-material phenomena, in the sense that they go beyond. Now, they are emerging from the material, so they still need the material to be there, right? You eliminate the material, there's nothing left. So in that sense, they are materialist phenomena. But to me, like, for example, the phenomenon of consciousness, is something that emerges at a higher level. But anyway, that would be an entire, discussion.
Yeah, we'll do that one, because I know you have a difference with Donald Hoffman that you're always giving me a hard time about.
Oh man, Hoffman, no. But we can have an entire 1 hour on
We'll
Hoffman.
We'll do it next time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. I would love it, because I I think he's misinterpreted, and okay, but okay, yeah, let's not get into that now because we could talk forever.
So the last. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you done with? Go ahead. Continue.
No, I mean, but basically, yeah, the point is, yeah, you're absolutely right. Once Peterson kind of shows you how the trick is done, it's like it's like you see a magician and you say, wow, this is amazing what they do. But once somebody explains to you how the trick is done, it doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same impact on you anymore, right? And I think that's why people like Paul van der Klee are kind of afraid of, is that if you explain too much what's going on underneath the system and how this is happening, from an evolutionary psychological point of view, it explains too much from them, because then why do you need the supernatural explanation if you can explain it, at a more basic level that people can understand? But on the other hand, I kept telling him, listen, that's why Jordan Peterson was so interesting and so popular. That is exactly because he was providing some explanations. Up to this point, a lot of Christians and religious people, when confronted with, scientific atheists, they had no answers. It was, well, that's just the way I feel. It's just the way I believe. And Peterson gave him some tools to say, well, actually, there are some pretty good reasons for all that stuff. Ultimately, though, it's true that the more explanations you can provide from a rational point of view, the least you need that, top-down explanation saying, well, God made it that way. You can always have that if you want. I mean, the Catholic Church, for example, is perfectly on board with Darwinian evolution, at least officially. I mean, it astounds me how many Christians are against Darwinian evolution. It's just like, it baffles me. Say, why? You're just hurting your own cause. You're sounding like an idiot almost. I mean, okay, that's too much of a word. It's too insulting. I didn't mean it that way, but you're not sounding rational. Let's put it that way. You're, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason. Just the existence of Darwinian evolution doesn't mean God doesn't exist in and of itself. It's
none of that stuff.
The Catholic Church has done a very good job about reconciling the two. For example.
None of that stuff bothers me, Carl. None of that stuff bothers me at all. If people I am comfortable with people in the very secular sense, with people who want to believe whatever they want to believe. I'm not out there trying to advocate for people. I'm not trying to change people's minds. So, and I went into that Peugeot conversation with that. I understand that a lot of people, that's a huge desire for them, is to change people's minds. You'll sleep better at night knowing that it's near impossible, and you're probably wasting your energy trying to do it. I'm super open. I'm an artist. I score high on openness to experience. So I am comfortable with a world where a lot of people believe different things. I think it's why we have the intellectual and philosophical diversity that we do, which I look at as a blessing. So I completely differ on most people. And it's funny because even like the evolutionary psychology explains this. In our past, it was very dangerous to side with the tribe over the hill because you might be called a traitor and kicked out and killed. So our primal psychology really wants us to be surrounded by people who agree with us because it's uncomfortable not to. So we have to at some level overcome our innate psychology to be able to do this. But I think, the human culture is elastic enough that people can do this. We just have to fight to do it. So the last question that I have is on the relevance. And I keep asking in Peugeot's comment section, and I can't get a firm answer. For me, for my understanding, the relevance of Peugeot's system with the patterns and the symbology and that kind of stuff is, for some people, it is evidence for God. They're using it very much as evidence that God exists, that there's something higher driving this kind of thing, and it's evidence for God.
Also, people talk a lot about meaning. This gives their life meaning, or meaning or happiness or fulfillment or well-being, whatever you want to call it. So those are the two reasons that I think are ultimately driving the ship. But I'm curious what you think the relevance of the Peugeot thing is.
Yeah. By the way, I probably should have said that at the beginning of the conversation, but the correct pronunciation is Peugeot.
Oh, Peugeot.
I'm a native French speaker to it, but it's
Peugeot. Okay. I will adjust.
But anyway, no, it's true. I mean, and I guess the best way for me to put it, are you familiar with Paul van der Klee? If you've listened to him enough, you might be familiar, but with his distinction between God 1 and God 2, God number 1, God number 2.
He uses that so much, and he's really doing his channel a disservice by not defining it every time, because his terminology is not intuitive at all. So he says God 1 and God 2 all the time, and I have no idea what he's talking about because I never...
Okay, well,
I never got the original stuff.
I know what he's talking about. I'm pretty sure.
So maybe we can give him some intuitive terminology here. What would be a good
but
intuitive
anyway,
term
to me,
for
God 1,
one?
I call it you can call it the natural law is what I like. But there's also the term the logos, which Peugeot uses quite often.
Okay,
logos.
So
it's kind of like the logic of the world, right? It's how the world, it's the order of the universe.
So that's like the intellectual God. That's like the God that the philosophers are saying.
And some people would call it Spinoza's God. I don't know
deist
if you're familiar
God.
with Spinoza's philosophy, but that's also Albert Einstein was very fond of that type of God. It's kind of like this very abstract. Well, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I mean, the idea is that the universe behaves, whether it's at the particulate atomistic level, fields and forces and energy in an orderly way. I mean, it's not complete chaos. There are structures, and they obey what we call, let's say, the laws of physics, right? If you want to reduce it to that. When it comes to the human world and the emerging phenomenon of consciousness and intentionality, agency, and all that, then the laws of physics no longer suffice to explain what's going on. You have to reach into a new vocabulary, a new set of rules, and all kinds of stuff. You cannot no longer reduce it to the laws of physics, but it's still part of the laws of the universe. Like the one law that we may say, no decision without skin in the game is a law of the human world. Okay, if you don't go by that law, you will get into trouble. Okay, but then it brings up this entire notion about this. Now that there emerges a distinction between the descriptive law and the normative law. And normative law is when we get into ethics, morals, and so on and so on. And then that's why the famous David Hume's famous naturalistic fallacy: you cannot derive an ought from an is. And I think you agree with that. I don't. I think all the oughts are derived from ises.
I agree. Yeah. This is why I'm a moral objectivist.
Right. Okay. But so again, I know you've talked about this before, but I wasn't sure it's specific on that. But anyway, so there is this order of the universe that's defined, but that has nothing to do. That's completely distinct from the existence of what Paul van der Klee calls a personal God. In other words, this entity, however you want to define it, that's outside of the universe, that's not, it doesn't exist within the material world, it's outside, but that's the God that answers your prayers, right? That actually potentially creates miracles on occasion.
So
at least that's what some people believe. That's the God that, to me, that's what I call the existential God. That's the God that people need to give meaning to their lives. Now, I understand that. I understand that as a human, being conscious in a world where the material world itself doesn't seem to have meaning inherent in it. So I perfectly understand the need for a person, and that's completely personality dependent. I don't feel that need, but I completely understand if somebody else does, right? That they need to relate to a personal God, somebody that they can pray to at night, and if it makes them feel better, I have no objections. That's perfectly fine. I think, though, that what the atheists like Sam Harris were worried about, and why their opposition to religion became so extreme, is because there is a danger all the time that's lurking in the background of religion becoming totalitarian, and we've seen that in the past. There's definitely a trend within Islam today. No, I'm not saying that all of Islam is like this, but there are strands within Islam. And you can go back into the history of that religion and retrace it back to its origins and stuff like that. But there is a potential danger there. That the imposition of religion, of the same religion on everyone by force if necessary. That's a danger, and we cannot dismiss that. Okay?
I agree.
So and that's what Sam Harris made big head on. That's how he became sort of famous. Came on the line his kind of questions about actually implemented Islam in the world, And so to me, like when Paul van der Kleek criticized him secularism, I say, well, go live in Saudi Arabia. That's as far as you can get from a secular. That's as far as you can get from a secular society, in the contemporary, in the modern world. Saudi Arabia is as far almost. You could argue Iran, or maybe there might be some others, but. Or if you want to go broader, you could say like North Korea has the religion of communism, right? So, yeah. But so those societies are non-secular in that sense. They have imposed a single religion on their entire society, and that's it. And if you dissent, you're in big trouble.
It's
right?
As much as
that's
they
why
complain.
Secularism is so important. And the criticism by Paul van der Kleek of secularism, I think, is absolutely the wrong track. It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
I've never heard him make this. I've never heard him make this criticism at all. But for as much as they say, secularism steals its ethics from Christianity, they don't respect how secularism tamed Christianity in a big way.
100% in agreement. Yeah. I've said that many, many times. One of Paul van der Kleek's mistakes is, the truth behind what he's saying is people forget how much modernity inherited from the Christian tradition. And, the books like Dominion by Tom Holland, and there's many other books. I have some on my shelves, about that, talking about how we take for granted, that we're imbued with Christianity. With Christian values and stuff like that. So that 100% on board with that. The other side of that coin, though, is what you just mentioned, is how much Christianity has been tamed by secular values and the values of modernity, the Enlightenment. Yes, the Enlightenment probably would not have happened without Christianity being there in the first place. Completely agree. But there's more to it. Christianity itself was radically changed. Well, maybe not radically changed, but significantly changed by the emergence of the Enlightenment, of modernity, and of secularity. And that's the part that they people like Paul van der Kleek and the Christian apologists keep forgetting. And I think that's bad. It was a give and take, just like it is in all of the evolution of human culture. Human culture evolves, more or less. Well, whether it's pure Darwinian evolution or, partly Lamarckian, that's subject for debate. But anyway, it is an evolutionary framework, regardless, whether it's pure Darwinian or not, need not concern us right now. But human culture evolves, and it is a very complex system. In fact, it is the most complex of complex systems. It's a system made itself of complex systems that are themselves made of complex systems. So, the interaction between different strands of human culture and how it's very difficult to tease out, which one is the more influential. But there's no question Christianity has huge influence, in the Western world, and even in the world as a whole now. You can see it everywhere. But also, you had, a rational person has to see that Christianity itself was tamed. I think that's the word you use, or changed, you know. And I agree, tamed is not a bad word. And that's the part they don't want to see. And to me, that's not good. You know, you have to see that. You have to see that it was an interaction. It wasn't a one-way street, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Christianity heavily influenced modernity, the Enlightenment, you know, secularism. But then there was also a backway loop.
So what am I missing?
Onto Christianity.
What am I missing about Peugeot? What's the relevance?
Peugeot, no, but one thing I wanted to see to tell you before it was one of the ways to see that you cannot just sit within the Christian framework and be happy with it is that even within Christianity there are a lot of disagreements about what Christianity means. You understand, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Christianity has been used to justify anything from pure communism, like let's say liberation theology type of thinking, and they say the Bible says communism is the best way, and that's one extreme. At the other end, I have a book by Tom Wood here, about Catholicism's influence on the how, in fact, the title is How the Catholic Church Built the Western World or something like this, by Tom Wood, and he's an anarcho-capitalist, right?
Yeah.
He believes in no government, capitalism is the thing, individual liberty, blah blah blah. So the exact opposite. And these total extreme views of politics are, in their views, based on the correct interpretation of what the Bible says, right? So that goes to show you that if you're going to make a decision as to which one is correct, right? And we don't need to figure it out now, but if you're going to try to make a decision as to which one is correct, you're going to have to step out of the Christian framework and adopt a broader framework, which is what Peugeot calls the cosmological framework, right?
Oh, okay, interesting.
So he did say in your conversation with him, he said the way he views things is Christianity is sort of a subset of that bigger, broader cosmological framework, but to him, Christianity is the best insight into that cosmological framework, right? He said that is his path to access to that greater cosmological framework, which I call the logos or the natural law. Right? The laws of the universe are what they are. That's something we humans can't change. We have to accept them for what they are. If I deny the existence of gravity, which, oh, by the way, it sounds ridiculous, but there are papers now, post-modernist type of stuff saying, well, let's not believe anything that science says because it's all white patriarchy.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
So I mean, it's gotten that absurd, right? So
yeah, we're living in a very absurdist time. So
yeah, right. So it sounds like I'm exaggerating that people would deny that the existence of gravity, but actually some people apparently are saying that, that gravity, the laws of gravity, Newton is a dead white guy, so therefore, or Einstein, same thing. We can disregard everything they said because, patriarchy. Okay, whatever. Okay, well, go ahead and jump from the Empire State Building, then see what happens.
So let me just see if I can.
But anyway, I know we need to conclude here. So
we're going over time anyway. But I'm super interested in this relevance thing. So you're saying that Peugeot's the relevance of Peugeot's project is he's showing Christians how to access this natural law. He calls it the cosmological law. I would call it like the scientific worldview, maybe, or the naturalist worldview through Christianity. It doesn't seem relevant to me because obviously I'm with you. Well, I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that in order to understand things, we have to step outside of them, as you've said. So I think we'll have a better understanding of Christianity from an outside perspective.
Yeah, well, ultimately, though, you cannot step out of everything. You always, regardless, the only thing we can do is adopt the broadest framework possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're still going to be within the framework. But the broadest framework possible, I agree with you, although calling it the scientific framework, that's kind of a tough one, because yes, that would be correct if you mean that in theory, science can explain everything ultimately.
Maybe empiricist is better, because I'm just thinking in terms of
but the thing is, I'm going back to the fact that there's still a lot of knowledge that's not explicit, and just because it's not explicit, just because science hasn't come up with an explanation for something yet, you cannot dismiss it entirely.
But empiricism is how we would find those things.
Yes, in theory. But until we do find those things, again, Chesterton's fence, we should not reject everything that's not explicit without fear of throwing the baby with the bathwater.
I agree. Right? Yeah.
So we have to be careful, because some people will interpret what you said, the scientific framework, as saying anything that's not explained by science we can disregard, and I disagree with that.
Yeah, I disagree, a lot of stuff
too. Right, I know you do, but it's just a matter of terminology. I know that's not what you mean, but when you say I would equate it with a scientific framework, that's why I'm raising the flag of caution there, because some people might interpret it as that, right?
Yeah. We're very much developing a language here, which is part of what's interesting about this project. So I do agree. And I think you were saying God, Paul's God 1 is like the intellectual God, and Paul's God 2 is the personal God.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, when I say intellectual God, he's the God of the laws of the universe, right? He's the God. He's completely abstract. He's not. He or she or it, is not something that exists per se. It is a completely abstract construct. Right? It is a metaphorical representation for the entire set of the rules, the laws that make the universe an order. That there's order in the universe, right? The universe is not pure chaos with just a giant gas cloud with stuff happening with nothing, No, there is an order. There are stars, there are planets, there are galaxies. And there's also an order of the human world, So there's an order of what is the best way for people to interact with each other without killing each other. And again, that's a different discussion, because that goes back into, what is the source of morality? What is the source of ethics? I have very strong opinions about this. And I think you and I are not exactly on the same page, but I think we could have a fruitful discussion on this.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again.
I think we're close enough that we would understand each other.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk again, Carl. This has been an amazing conversation. So if Paul listens to this, I think his videos would gain 35% more value if he used the term intellectual God or abstract God. Yeah, or abstract God versus personal God. Because every time he says God 1 and God 2, I like, as a newcomer, someone new to it, they don't know what he's talking about. So at least you're getting closer to those terms. And my term, like the scientific worldview, I agree with you. It's not the best term, but we'll work on that in the future. Thank you. I do thank you for jumping in here last minute. I have a few super chats to read. So Alex Karras for $5 says, does this mean that A team is Team Truth? I put Team Truth in the title just to like trigger people a little bit. I try to make interesting titles for a little clickbait to get people interested. So Mr. Tickle Trunk for $5 says, wait, you two can disagree respectfully? Are we on the internet? Everyone check. It feels weird. Yeah. You get spicy in some comment sections, though. I see you telling people to F off and like get lost. I restrain myself. I have one more super chat, Carl. Let me get to it. Caffeinated Tweaker for $2 says, I'm definitely working and not procrastinating. I think you forgot the /S on there, CT. I can see you're procrastinating, but thank you for listening in anyway. You want any final thoughts before I end the stream?
No, but I'm definitely on the pro-truth team. That truth to me is the highest value there. So
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So that there's absolutely, you know, if you want to talk about ethics and morality, well, truth is above there. It doesn't mean that, you know, obviously people always say, well, there's some times where it's better, you know, tactically not to tell the truth. You know, like if your wife asks you whether, you know, these pants make her look fat, okay, but I mean, you know, but in the metaphysical, you know, truth is the highest value. You know, the live not by lies, Dreher and all. I mean, that I completely on board with that. And yeah, you mentioned sometimes I do get salty. There's one thing, two things I you know, I love truth, and I hate people who are say not authentic. You know, they kind of playing games. You know, this not games. I mean, you know, this is about important stuff. And so when they start drifting into you know, just not being honest. You know, truth and honesty are two things that are very, very important to me. And so when people start throwing all that, yeah, I'm pretty quick to just, you know, I'll just, because I'm a former fighter pilot, so I never know. I don't fly jets. I don't fly jets anymore. I haven't for many years now. I've been retired for quite a while, but yeah, we don't take, you know, crap.
You're ready easily to open fire at any moment.
Yeah, that's right. I'll gun your brains out, like I say.
So I got a couple more super chats. Gemini Mimi for $2 says, "I love you, Adam." Thank you, Gemini. Mr. Tickle Trunk for 5 Canadian says, "Truth's arrow or capital T truth?" I don't necessarily know what you mean there, but we'll go ahead and leave it there. I got another thing I got to get to, but thanks for
capital T.
Okay. Thanks for joining in, Carl, and we'll definitely do this again. Take care, everyone, and leave us your thoughts in the comments below, as always. Take care.
Bye. I really enjoyed that one.